Roger, liftoff and the clock has started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear.
Roger, roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, go from them.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 4, 2020 edition of Space News. This is Peter Aylward, and tonight I'm joined by Tina Stagg and Michael Abdullah. We're all from the Space Association. So let's get started once again with some Australian space news. Australia's growing launch industry wants the government to provide more financial and regulatory support to help it get established in the global market. In a panel discussion at the 9th Australian Space Forum in Adelaide, leaders of launch vehicle companies and spaceport operators emphasised the benefits of their industry in creating jobs and overall economic development. The call came as Australia's space industry crossed the $5 billion revenue mark for the first time, according to accounting firm KPMG. The panel said Australia was well positioned to capture a share of the growing demand for satellite launches. Companies said they were looking for government support that paralleled what is available in other countries. Adam Gilmore, Chief Executive of small launch vehicle developer Gilmore Space Technologies, said while most of the customers for his company's vehicle were from outside of Australia, his company can't compete for contracts from government agencies in some countries like the US, where they have to buy domestically. He called for a similar policy in Australia. Gilmore also advocated for the Australian government to support development of launch infrastructure like spaceports, citing examples such as the US, where both federal and state governments have invested in launch sites. And some more Australian space news. Queensland-based launch provider Black Sky Aerospace and UK company Raptor Aerospace will conduct Australia's first privately operated international rocket motor test and Sanning rocket launch campaign. The campaign is planned to take place in coming months at the Beyond the Blue Aerospace suborbital launch facility just outside of Goondiwindi in Queensland outback. The Raptor Aerospace team intends to undertake a campaign to first test and space qualify their own launch vehicles and systems. Coming to Australia to undertake this type of test and recovery campaign is more practical than carrying it out in the UK. The vast launch and recovery area provided by Beyond the Blue Aerospace and the project requirements enabled by Black Sky Aerospace will resolve any logistical, population or airspace challenges Raptor Aerospace would face in Europe. CEO and founder of Black Sky Aerospace, Blake Nikolic, said Australia is playing an increasing role in the world's space ambitions, and we are playing a significant role in enabling access to an efficient, cost-effective service. Enhancing the campaign, ties between the UK Space Agency and Australian Space Agency are very strong, thanks to the recent announcement of a space bridge that aims to shape the scope for work in space between the two nations and support future objectives and ambitions. And over to you, Tina.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening, space fans. Looking at NASA news and commercial resupply services, SpaceX's next launch to the International Space Station was delayed by several days to replace the rocket's upper stage. NASA announced last week that the launch of the Dragon CRS-20 cargo mission was now scheduled for the night of March 6, a slip of nearly 5 days. The agency said SpaceX detected a problem with a valve motor in the second stage of the rocket and decided the best course of action was to replace the entire stage with another already at the launch site. The Dragon will deliver more than 2,500 kilograms of experiments and supplies to the station. CRS-20 is the last of the commercial resupply services Phase 1 missions for SpaceX. All subsequent missions will be undertaken under the CRS Phase 2 contract using Dragon 2 spacecraft. And to the Commercial Crew Program, Boeing didn't perform an end-to-end test of the software on its CST-100 Starliner before a test flight in December that suffered 2 major software problems. Members of a NASA safety advisory panel said they were surprised to find that Boeing didn't do the comprehensive test which could have caught the problems with both the spacecraft's timer and the configuration of thrusters on the spacecraft's service module during re-entry preparations. The safety panel did not discuss this particular concern at its most recent public meeting in early February, when it disclosed the second software problem on the test flight. John Mulholland, the program manager in charge of the Starliner crew capsule program, last week admitted additional checks would have uncovered the problems with the spacecraft software. NASA appears to be preparing for a long-duration Crew Dragon test flight to the International Space Station. The agency recently released photos of astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley doing spacewalk and robotics training. But the training would not be required if the Crew Dragon test mission they will fly, Demo 2, stays at the station for only a short time. In January, NASA revealed it was studying the possibility of a long-duration Demo 2 mission that would require additional ISS training. And looking at NASA's lunar programs, a draft report that makes major changes to NASA's Artemis program is not the plan the agency is pursuing, officials said last week. The plan called for launching an integrated lunar lander on an SLS launch immediately before an Orion launch of the astronauts who would fly that lander to the lunar surface, rather than use commercial launches to assemble the lander at the Lunar Gateway. The plan would require 2 SLS launches 2 months apart in 2024, but would delay the next human mission to the moon until 2026. NASA officials, including Administrator Jim Bridenstine, said the plan laid out in the report was not the one they are pursuing, but the agency has yet to announce what revisions, if any, it is making to its Artemis plan. Northrop Grumman last week completed the final test of the launch abort motors that will be used on NASA's Orion spacecraft. A 30-second hot fire test of an attitude control motor that is part of the launch abort system was the third and final test needed to qualify the motor for use on the system. One more test of a separate abort motor is planned well before the overall system is fully qualified. The system will be flown for the first time on the Artemis 2 mission, the first crewed Orion flight expected no earlier than 2022. And NASA is seeking bids on the delivery of a rover to the lunar poles. The agency last week issued a task order to the 14 companies in its commercial lunar payload services program, asking them to bid on the launch of the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover, or VIPER mission. VIPER will go to the lunar poles to look for deposits of water ice believed to exist in craters there, launching in 2023. And to NASA's planetary programs, NASA's InSight lander has confirmed the presence of Mars quakes on the red planet. Initial findings from the mission, published last week, said the seismometer on the lander had detected 450 quakes of modest strength to date. The quakes are created as the planet cools and contracts, causing fractures in its outer layers. The findings also included information about atmospheric conditions and the discovery of a local magnetic field 10 times stronger than expected. Meanwhile, NASA is planning a new approach to get an instrument on InSight into the Martian surface. The agency will use the scoop on the end of the lander's robotic arm to push down on a heat flow probe, or mole, to help it get into the surface. The probe is designed to hammer its way as deep as 5 metres into the surface, but ran into problems nearly a year ago that caused it to stop only 30 centimetres down. And over to Michael.
Thank you, Tina, and let's turn to European news. The rover on Europe's ExoMars mission needs repairs before its launch. The rover, Rosalind Franklin, will undergo a pit stop during pre-launch preparations to repair solar panel brackets that have come loose. The European Space Agency announced last month that it would hold a joint briefing with Roscosmos, its partner on ExoMars, on March 12 to provide an update on the status of the mission, scheduled for launch this northern summer. The announcement of the briefing has heightened speculation that ExoMars won't be ready in time because of ongoing work on the parachutes used for its landing system. And turning to China. Chinese scientists have published new results from the Chang'e 4 lunar mission. A paper in the journal Science Advances this week discusses results from the ground-penetrating radar on the lander's U-2 rover, which probed as deep as 40 metres below the lunar surface. The radar found 3 distinct layers, starting with a fine-grained regolith and a few rocks in the uppermost layer, followed by a layer of coarser materials and more rocks, and then a layer with alternating fine and coarse-grain bands of material. Scientists said the pattern of layers could be the result of ejecta deposits from craters in the vicinity of the landing site. And in Indian news, a new report describes India's plans for satellite launches and other space projects for the coming year. The report states that India's space agency ISRO is gearing up to launch 10 Earth observation satellites during the next financial year, starting in April, as well as 3 communication satellites, 2 navigation satellites, and a space docking experiment. India will also work on its human spaceflight program with an uncrewed flight of the spacecraft scheduled for December. A new small satellite launcher, which was to make its first launch last year, is now expected to make 2 demo flights in the coming fiscal year. India's first launch of the year, a geostationary satellite that will provide continuous low-resolution images of the country, is scheduled for March the 5th. And in commercial news, SpaceX's new Starship prototype appeared to burst during a pressure test at the company's South Texas facility last week. The Starship SN1 prototype, which SpaceX moved to a launch pad near its Boca Chica assembly site, blew apart during a liquid nitrogen pressure test. A video posted by NASA Spaceflight.com member Boca Chica Gal clearly shows the Starship SN1's midsection buckling during the test, then shooting upward before crashing back down to the ground. Starship SN1 is a test article for SpaceX's planned Starship and Super Heavy mega rocket, a massive reusable vertical launch, vertical landing system designed to fly deep space missions to the Moon, Mars and beyond. According to Boca Chica Gal, Elon Musk has revealed that there was a fault discovered during the welding process, so this prototype was only ever to be used for ground testing. A new welding process is underway for SN2. And turning to Virgin Galactic. The first commercial Spaceship Two flights by Virgin Galactic may slip again as the company takes a step towards reopening ticket sales. The company, publicly traded since October, released its fourth quarter and full year 2019 financial results last week, showing a large loss that was expected as the company continues vehicle development. In an investor presentation last September, Virgin Galactic said it expected commercial operations to begin in June, but the company declined to affirm the schedule in a conference call with analysts. Instead, Virgin said its top priority was to fly company founder Richard Branson on a commercial flight this year. And it said any commercial revenue it might generate this year was a lower priority than getting the Spaceship Two system ready for regular commercial operations. The company took a step toward resuming ticket sales by announcing a program where people can pay a $1,000 deposit and get first shot at tickets when they are available. Those tickets will cost more than the $250,000 previously charged by Virgin Galactic, although the company did not disclose a price. And over to Peter.
Thanks, Michael. And finally this week, in more commercial news, Northrop Grumman successfully tested the second stage of its Omega rocket last week. The company said the static test of the solid rocket motor at a site in Utah was a success, producing more than 356,000 kilogram force of thrust during its 140-second burn. The company is developing Omega for the US Space Force's National Security Space Launch Phase 2 launch service procurement, competing against Blue Origin, SpaceX and United Launch Alliance. Well, thank you, Mike and Tina, and that's all for this week. We'll speak to you next week. Good night.